Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's time. We have ourselves a Mavuika rerun incoming, and naturally the big question is, should you get her? No. Here's the question I want you to ask yourself. Is there anything that you like about Mavuika? Do you like how she looks? Do you like her in the story? Do you like her overall gameplay? If you answered yes to any of these questions and you don't have her yet, the answer is very clear. You absolutely 100% should definitely totally get her. If you hate everything about Mavuika, then yeah, you have my blessing to skip her. At the end of the day, it is still very possible to clear all the content at a relatively sufficient level without getting Mavuika. So far. Hell, I oopsie daisy cleared the fearless Stygian onslaught without her. Granted, I have some constellations, not a variety of characters, but still, if there is someone else that you like and you really don't like Mavuika at all, okay, then go for that other character. Go have fun. But in my opinion, Mavuika is actually quite fun to play. Her normal attacks are usually whatever, but they can break geoshields a little quicker than other Claymore characters, I think, since she's crazy enough to at least throw her Claymore as part of her hit that does 3 extra hits. Her skill is where the motorcycle comes out. Barring that, there's always her Ring of Fire. I really like using the motorcycle, not just for donutting, but also for traveling, and also her funny normal attack chains. And then, of course, there is her ult, which is, of course, a gigantic nuke, which, of course, is absolute serotonin, but then it also gives the reverse Yalan buff that ramps down instead of ramping up. Mavuika is also, by my estimation, the second most fun character to play in the game behind Cloran. Normally, the damage output of a character doesn't hold that much value over my subjective assessment of their overall gameplay. But Mavuika is the one character where, because she does so much damage, she's kind of able to forcibly drag that metric up so high that she ends up surpassing a lot of other characters who arguably have definitely more engaging gameplay. Skirk, Varessa, Arlecchino. With all that being said, I highly recommend the Pyro Archon. For those who are new to the channel, when there's a new character rerun that I would like to talk about, I usually get into the following topics. Characters that have showed up since, in Mavuika's case, her release, teams that I like to play, weapons worth building, artifact builds worth farming, and of course, how I feel about their constellations. Obviously, Mavuika is not going to be any different in that regard, so like the video and don't forget to subscribe. There will be more videos on the way. I can't think of what they will be at the present moment, but we'll just see what happens. As well as live streams on both Twitch and YouTube, so ringing that bell icon will get you notified of the latest content on the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it.
Light up a blazing sun! Try and stop! Animal hypostasis emulation! Carving waves! Check this out!
Since Mavuika's release, we've had quite a few characters show up who can be varyingly useful. Obviously, Citlali was one that showed up alongside Mavuika during that patch. She is arguably Mavuika's strongest teammate for Melt teams. PMC can also be useful if you need a scroll buffer, because let's say the enemy you're facing has a permanent Hydro aura, which makes it impossible to do pyro reactions with anyone, with the possible exception of some pyro infusion nonsense. PMC can also be a pretty decent alternative to Mavuika if you're fighting Gosuyoth. Lanyan and Mizuki are alright animo defensive options, but I don't think there's any particular reason to run them with Mavuika, especially because we also have Aoife as an option. He now also exists. He's ideally probably a better alternative considering he does burn Nightsoul. I don't hold him in any particularly high regard though gameplay wise, so don't get it twisted. You probably are absolutely perfectly fine running either Lanyan or Mizuki if you really need that kind of stuff. Varessa and Iansan are great electro characters that synergize really well with Mavuika in that they burn Nightsoul and then they also do some pretty good things along with Mavuika. Escoffier and Skirk are usually in their own realm of gameplay for the most part. There are some people who try to force Escoffier into like Melt Mavuika teams because they don't have Citlali, for example. With the exception of the fact that she's a terrific healer, I feel like you're better off using someone like, I don't know, C6 Kaya. Don't hold me to that, but yeah, there's no particularly strong reason to run Escoffier, I feel like. And then finally, of course, there's Dahlia, who's just basically a shield. That's it. So really, only a couple of new characters have been particularly relevant for Mavuika. But of course, we'll see in the future, when we're no longer in Natlan, what kind of characters are going to show up that could potentially give her some brand new options to mess around with.
Things are about to get dicey. Light up the blazing sun! Try and stop me!
There's one other thing I want to tackle real quick when it comes to Mavuika, and that's the topic of fighting spirit. As you may know, Mavuika doesn't use energy, instead she uses fighting spirit to fuel her ult. So for starters, the Raided Shogun A doesn't do anything for her. Now there's two ways to generate fighting spirit. You either use normal attacks, or you start burning Nightsoul. In the grand scheme of things, burning Nightsoul is pretty much the only relevant way I look at getting Mavuika's fighting spirit. With the possible exception of like Clorand and maybe Arlecchino, most of the time a character's normal attacks are just not going to cut it. Thus, Mavuika tends to be played best with at least one Nightsoul character. So, what are our options? Well, we have a lot to choose from, but just picking a few, Shilinen remains as one of the fastest fighting spirit generators in the game. Her EN2 just straight up generates 90 on a 7-second cooldown. Iansan, on the other hand, can burn about 5 Nightsoul a second, so usually during rotation, I think she generates roughly 80. Even free-to-play Kachina can generate about 60, or 80 if you happen to use her C2 correctly. Of course, Mavuika does need at least 100 fighting spirit in order to be able to pop her ult, let alone 200 if you want to have a full powered ult. So none of these characters are enough to do this on their own. But let us remember that Mavuika also burns Nightsoul. During a rotation, she will burn either 80 or 90 Nightsoul. That was actually a lie. Okay, here's the thing. There is an infinite Nightsoul freeze part of her ult. Because of that, I think there's going to be a lot of rotations where Mavuika ends up burning around about 40-ish Nightsoul, for example. Then she freezes her meter by popping her ult. And then just as her ult has finished doing the infinite Nightsoul freezing part, you can actually just start a new skill, in which case it completely refreshes her skill meter, and suddenly you have all of your Nightsoul again and you start burning from scratch. So yeah, but that's usually enough, like 40-ish Nightsoul is still usually enough to fill the gap that whatever Natlan character you have on the team has been able to provide. So unless you're playing with, let's say, C0 or C1 Kachina, even then you just need to be a little bit more patient with Mavuika's ult. I feel like at the end of the day, you should be a-okay in running Mavuika with just one singular extra Natlan character and you'll be able to use their ult on the regular. And even if you are kind of running into a bit of a problem with, let's say, Kachina, then, just be a little bit more patient. Let Mavuika's entire meter run out first, then pop her ult, and then you're good to go. All of this to say, I just wanted to refute something that someone with a much higher subscriber count than I apparently once said. No, you do not need 3 Natlan characters for Mavuika to ult every rotation. I don't know who the hell told you that. You only need 2. Or you only need just Mavuika if you have her C1.
Control breathing. Start the... Light up the blazing sun! Full drop! This is a new one. This'll pack a punch. Quick as a flash. On. Wrath from the sky! Rev the...
Mavuika alone tends to do a lot of damage. When building her teams, it is often a good idea to pick a character who can provide her with a lot of buffs to that damage. Now, Mavuika is a Pyro attack scaling character. This should make it really obvious as to who everyone needs to be using with her. I'll give you a hint. We're talking about a 4-star. You got a name in your mind? Yes, that's right. Let's all say the name together. 3, 2, 1. It's Iansan. No, stop thinking that name. He's washed. She power creeps him, but nothing. Is Jova. the answer is Iansan. Keeping her with the fighting spirit generation in mind, what teams can you play with Mavuika? There's actually a lot of teams that you can play with Mavuika, but with the characters that I have, and of course the characters that I don't have, I have 3 teams in particular that I really like to play. You may be able to use them as inspiration to form the teams that you like. So let's start off with Overload Cloran. Now, I play this team probably the least in my list, but it's still a really solid alternative to, let's say, the Raiden Overload team. A doesn't do anything for Mavuika, and Mavuika doesn't need 3000 ER, therefore I can play Cloran instead, and the team does end up running smoothly. And of course, there's always the meta nerds who reckon that Cloran is a power creep, for example. Allegedly, Cloran's strongest team is this one, but look, it's certainly not my most favorite Cloran team for the record. The second team that I want to talk about is Meltloy. Ooh, Mavuika's release did bring Meltloy into a brand new era of crazy damage. And I'm talking about over 200k Aloy ults, which is actually kind of crazy. On top of that, the rotation is such that Mavuika can also drop a melted ult in there too, so there's a bit of double carrying in this team. Mavuika does have a bit more than enough Pyro App for Aloy's normal attacks to melt the meltable hits as well, because she has more Pyro App than Dahaya, and Dahaya has barely enough Pyro App. So that works for me. I do prefer Shillidan over Iansan in a team like this, but that's partially because I have C2 Shillidan, so there's some extra crit damage for Aloy, and Iansan is a little bit more trickier to use with Aloy compared to, of course, someone like Shillidan. And then finally, there's the Mavuika team. Now, here's the thing about my Mavuika team. I don't have Citlali. So, where you'll hear a lot of people talking about Melt Mavuika gameplay, I'm of course very much a Vape Mavuika player. And this team, especially with the constellations that I have for some of these characters, is incredibly synergistic. Shillidan, like I mentioned, generates a lot of fighting spirit, and she can also at least guarantee Rage Shred for Mavuika, and there's always the damage percent from Peak Patrol Song. Also, there's the attack buff from C2. Gotta love that. And I've been playing with some fairly dank rotations that do involve getting scroll buffs for the pyro damage on Mavuika as well, so there is a little bit of all of that sort of working together. Iansan is of course the strongest attack buffer in the game. Mavuika can also easily maintain Iansan's Nightsoul meter to the point where you can easily get the C6 damage percent buff as well. And then finally, Farina is my preferred Hydro off-fielder because donating doesn't count as normal attacking, which does mean that technically I can't use Yelan in this slot. But technically I can, because if I don't mindlessly donut, there is a way to basically legitimately run Yelan instead. All you kind of need to do is just initiate the donuting on the regular instead of just holding your click and just continuously spinning. As long as you initiate the donuting every 2 or so vapable hits of the donut, yeah, you're pretty much good to go. I rather just have fun with Mavuika's funny motorbike normal attack animations at that point though, because they're funny, and then also I might just weave in a few donuts along the way. Yeah, I'm more of a fan of playing crazy motorbike Mavuika with Yelan than proper donutting with Yelan, if you know what I mean. One thing that's great about Vape Mavuika over Melt Mavuika, in my opinion, is that it's a lot less stressful to play. Melt Mavuika requires 2 cryo characters, I think, or at least Citlali by herself. You do need to be very careful as well with Mavuika's meltable hits, especially because her ICD results in there being 2 bits of pyro application that happen back to back. You can check out the Jeff's guide on these rotations if you're curious, because like hell am I going to be able to explain them. But notice how much danker I think the melt setups and rotations are. I know I said to you that Iansan is probably in a lot of Mavuika's and therefore also other attack scalers teams, but for Mavuika's reaction teams, there are of course some other alternatives if you don't have her. We still have some old school buffers like, say it with me, Kujosara. That's right, she is still synergizing pretty well with Mavuika in that her buff lasts about the same duration as Mavuika's Infinite Nightsoul duration buff, well, minus 1 second. Alternatively, of course, you could run someone like Sucrose for that EM share. That could be very useful as well. At the end of the day, Mavuika is actually flexible enough that you can work with a range of buffers and enablers. But when it comes to maximizing her potential, you basically want to lean into what she scales with. Reactions, massive damage, and of course, Nightsoul burning.
Let the world collide! Bring it! Hear the echoes of the valley! Backward! Stronger! On my... Light of the blazing sun! Try and stop me! Let my name echo in song! Let's... Pyroclastic surge!
Despite Mavuika being crazy meta and very strong, she's actually super easy to build. Let's start off with weapons. Thousand Blazing Suns is of course her signature weapon and it's still her best in slot. Bacon is probably her best alternative, but not by a huge margin compared to other 5-star crit stat sticks. Serpent Spine remains as her strongest 4-star option, but don't discount other weapons like Wolves or Mailed Flower. Now the reason why I say that is because crit rate stat sticks are usually preferred, but they do run into the problem of potentially overcapping your crit rate due to the passive of Mavuika's best in slot artifact set being Obsidian Codex. Therefore, in the scenario where that happens, you may want to consider Wolves, Mailed Flower. These are still very strong alternatives. They both, well, funnily enough, Wolves, Gravestone, and Mailed Flower seem to perform very similarly. So there's that. At the end of the day, look, weapon choice isn't massively critical in my opinion because Mavuika does so much damage that you should be a-okay. I mean, look, even still, like, there's Tidal's Shadow, that's a great free-to-play weapon in teams where Mavuika can be healed regularly, like from Iansan's small but regular healing. There's also Earthshaker, which at least is a perfectly fine free-to-play option in all Mavuika teams. It just doesn't do a whole lot of anything for Mavuika's burst though. But one thing to maybe keep in the back of your mind, if you're going to be a little bit critical about which weapon you want to use, I would recommend trying to use a 5-star weapon on Mavuika, because if you do, then Iansan continues to power creep the Circle Impact, whereas if you don't, then unfortunately Iansan stops power creeping Circle Impact in every team that isn't Overload, for example. Now when it comes to those artifacts, like I mentioned, Obsidian Codex is pretty much the way to go. There's no real alternative for DPS Mavuika. Now keep in mind though, the crit rate buff that comes from Obsidian Codex only lasts for 6 seconds, whereas your infinite Nightsoul duration is 7 seconds. So the last second of your infinite Nightsoul duration won't be getting the crit rate buff, so you may end up missing a crit here and there. In Chlorand Overvape teams, for example, you may consider swapping Mavuika to a scroll buff focus set, for example, because the scroll buff can actually work for all 3 DPSs in something like Chlorand Overvape, or hell, even Chlorand Chaos, so there's an option right there. Of course, not everyone is going to have a working Obsidian Codex set ready to go right from the jump, but keep in mind it can be farmed and you can strongbox other things, so you may want to just hyper focus on that. In the meantime though, apparently fallback sets like Golden Troop, 2-piece, they seem to be fine for the most part. You can at least use them for the time being while you are farming yourself an Obsidian set. With regards to artifact stats, I've stuck with EM attack crit, but it seems like you don't need to be too strict with how you choose to build with regards to those main stats. Attack sands, pyro cups, hell, even EM cups might actually be just as legit. At the end of the day, of course, test them against your dummy of choice, and more importantly, have a look at what buffs your team is giving you, and therefore build what is missing. And finally, there's Mavuika's Constellations. As always, you don't need them. Now, normally I don't recommend Constellations on 5-star characters, and this is going double time with Mavuika. She does a lot of damage. My Mavuika is C0. Now, granted, I have an R4 Wolf's Gravestone, but I can't really make full use of its passive most of the time anyway. I do have some Constellations on my supports, so keep that in mind when it comes to looking at the damage that I am doing in the video. That being said, though, there is a rumor floating around that apparently Iansan is set to show up as a rate up on Mavuika's banner. Should that be the case, we're no longer talking about a Mavuika banner. we are talking about an Iansan banner. And if that's the case, you are going to get Mavuika Constellations. How many Mavuika Constellations you end up with is going to be entirely based on your Iansan luck. Because you are going to get C6 Iansan. That's right. You could, of course, also spread the love and also grab Emily as well. It's entirely up to you. But you are going to get C6 Iansan. If you don't already have C6 Iansan, that is. Look, I would calibrate my enthusiasm to maybe +2 Mavuika Constellations. That seems to be the running theme whenever I try to go for a C6 4-star, more or less from scratch. Okay, no, in all seriousness, even if Iansan is a raid up on the banner, you don't have to go all out for C6 Iansan. C0 Iansan is already plenty good for Mavuika. It's just that I highly recommend Iansan, especially a full-powered Iansan, with Symphonist of Sense for a lot of teams, not just Mavuikas, but like a lot of teams. So if you do end up going for Iansan's Constellations, if you do end up going for Mavuika's Constellations, well, what do? C1 means you don't actually need another Natlan character to get more than 100 fighting spirit. Mavuika alone should be able to generate 150 fighting spirit, provided you are able to burn her entire Nightsoul bar, and you should be able to get what is basically a permanent attack buff. C2 is the first ever base attack increase in the game, with the ring also shredding defense and the bike having more talent value damage. With C2, well, first off, the power creep that the Iansan does over the boring one just further expands, but then number 2, you can actually start using 4-star weapons and you'll still end up having Iansan power creeping the boring one. C3 is old levels, C5 is skill levels. Both of these are good. C4 is a passive buff. Now, Mavuika's passive gets a bit stronger, just a little bit, and also no longer ramps down. C4s are famously not that exciting, and I'm gonna be real here, neither is this one. C6, finally, is of course the stock standard. This ability does way more damage type dealio. We've been seeing that with a lot of 5-star C6s. The ring form has an extra motorbike that hits enemies and it does a bunch of damage. It doesn't apply pyro from that damage because that's just how it is. The bite form, you actually get a special ring that does some extra big damage that also doesn't apply pyro, but the ring shreds defense. The biggest draw for her C6, in my opinion, is none of that. Instead, it's just the idea that you can infinitely ride her bike for travel purposes, because every 15 seconds it'll do an 80 Nightsoul refresh while you're riding around, which you can also sort of strategically use alongside some new skill activations, so you get to be basically permanently on that motorcycle, provided you're not sprinting, as far as I can tell. In summary, when it comes to building Mavuika, just do what I've done. Obsidian, a 5-star DPS weapon of some description, and of course, C0. You're pretty much good to go. Mavuika, being the Archon of Natlan, is truly the Archon of War. Not only does she do an insurmountable amount of damage and has been considered the Herald of Power Creep, but she also draws her power from combat, like she's Ares. So if nothing else, she's also thematically accurate. I think it'll be a good long while before the community genuinely stops recommending her, but that will be an absolutely terrifying time to be playing the game. Let me know what you think about all of this in the comments below. Do you share my opinion on how she's fun to play? Or do you have something that you disagree with? Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, hope you guys enjoyed. If you like this video, hit that like button, subscribe for more Genshin Impact action. And until next time, I will see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.